My wife told me that she cheated on me and I was a loser, and in revenge I recorded a detailed video of me, her best friend, and then before any of this happened, before my life turned into a chaotic mess of betrayal and revenge, there was something from my past, a part of me I rarely talked about. It wasn't because I was ashamed, or because I had buried it too deep to remember. No, the truth was far more unsettling. It was because that part of me had shaped everything, more than I cared to admit. It had molded me into the person I became, a person capable of making the kinds of choices I later made. But the person I was back then wasn't someone you'd want to know, and it certainly wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to make it this far in life. In my youth, I had secrets, dark ones that, if people knew, would make them look at me differently, forever. It's funny how, when you're young, you don't see the long-term consequences of your actions. You live in the moment, and the choices you make seem isolated, like they exist in a vacuum. But they don't. Everything you do, everything you are in those formative years, it all bleeds into who you become later. I learned that the hard way. To most people, I was just another quiet kid, minding my own business, staying out of trouble. But beneath that surface, there was another side of me, a side that only a select few ever saw. It started with curiosity, the kind that pushes you to see how far you can go before you get caught. At first, it was small stuff. A stolen item here, a lie there. Nothing big, nothing that would land me in serious trouble. But that thrill, that rush of doing something wrong and getting away with it, was intoxicating. As I got older, those little things weren't enough. I needed more. The stakes had to be higher. That's when I started hanging out with the wrong crowd. Not just rebellious kids, but ones who had no moral boundaries. They were the kind of people who didn't care about the rules of society. They lived by their own code, and being around them felt like I had tapped into something dangerous and exhilarating. It wasn't long before I got involved in something far more serious. I was 16, still in high school, when I met Luke. He wasn't from our town, but word of his reputation had spread quickly. He was older, smarter, and far more dangerous than anyone I had ever met. He didn't do petty crime. He dealt in manipulation, exploitation, and violence. His way of thinking was different. He saw the world as one big game, and people were just pieces to move around, to use however he wanted. For reasons I still can't fully explain, I was drawn to that. Maybe it was because I wanted to prove something to myself, to see if I could be like him. Or maybe it was just because I was young and stupid. Luke took me under his wing, and before I knew it, I was helping him with things I never thought I'd be involved in. At first, it was just driving him places, no questions asked. But it escalated quickly. Soon, I found myself in the middle of schemes that, looking back, still make my stomach turn. The worst part? I didn't care. I liked it. There was something thrilling about being on the edge of danger, about knowing we were doing things no one else would dare to. The risk, the secrecy. It was like nothing I had ever experienced. One night, Luke decided to take things further. He had this idea, a plan. Really, that was unlike anything we'd done before. It wasn't about stealing or scamming. It was about hurting someone. Not physically, but in a way that would destroy their life, rip everything they cared about away from them. He didn't tell me all the details at first, just that we were going to ruin someone's future. The target was a kid from my school, Greg, who had made the mistake of crossing Luke's path. He wasn't involved in anything shady, but Luke had a grudge against him for something trivial. That didn't matter to Luke. He had decided Greg needed to pay, and he was going to make sure it happened. We spent weeks planning, watching Greg's every move, learning everything about his life. It was methodical, calculated. I remember feeling a sense of excitement as we pieced together the plan, as if we were setting up some grand heist. But this wasn't about money. It was about control, about power. Luke had a way of manipulating people that was almost frightening, and soon enough, we had others involved. People who didn't even know Greg became a part of it, spreading rumors, planting seeds of doubt and suspicion around him. We made sure everyone at school saw him differently, that they started to believe the worst about him. But it didn't stop there. Luke took it further than I ever imagined. He found a way to frame Greg for something that would follow him for the rest of his life. It wasn't just a prank, and it wasn't something Greg could walk away from easily. We hacked into the school systems and planted evidence that made it look like Greg had been involved in something illegal. I'll spare you the details, but it was bad. Bad enough that Greg's life was torn apart. He was expelled from school, his family was humiliated, and the authorities got involved. His future, which had once seemed so promising, was shattered in an instant. Watching it all unfold, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was horrified at what we had done, but another part of me, the darker part, was exhilarated by the power we had over someone's life. We had ruined him, and no one even knew it was us. Luke was proud of it. He called it a masterpiece, his finest work. I didn't know how to feel. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror for weeks after that, but I couldn't deny the rush it gave me either. Greg never recovered. His family moved away, and I heard rumors that he had gotten into even worse trouble later on. I never saw him again, but I couldn't shake the guilt. It wasn't just that we had ruined his life. It was that I had been a part of it, willingly. I had crossed a line that most people never even see, let alone step over, and I couldn't come back from it. After that, I started to distance myself from Luke. The thrill was gone, replaced by a nagging sense of guilt and shame that I couldn't shake. I stopped hanging out with him, stopped getting involved in his schemes. But the damage had already been done. I couldn't undo what we had done to Greg, and no matter how hard I tried to forget it, it stayed with me, lurking in the back of my mind. I spent the next few years trying to bury that part of my life, to forget the person I had been. I focused on rebuilding myself, on becoming the kind of person I could be proud of. I went to college, got a degree, found a job, and tried to live a normal life. But no matter how far I ran, the past never truly left me. It followed me like a shadow, a constant reminder of the choices I had made, the person I had been. And then I met Emily. She was everything I wasn't: bright, charming, full of life. Being with her made me feel like I had finally escaped the darkness that had once consumed me. I convinced myself that the past was behind me, that I had changed, that I had become a better person. For years, I lived in that illusion, thinking I had moved on. But deep down, I knew the truth. You don't just walk away from something like that. You carry it with you, no matter how hard you try to forget. The things I did in my youth shaped me in ways I never fully understood until much later. The darkness that I had once embraced left a mark, one that would resurface when I least expected it. And when my life with Emily started to unravel, when everything I had built with her began to fall apart, I realized that the person I had been back then, the one who was capable of ruining someone's life without a second thought, had never truly left me. He was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to come back out. That's the thing about the past. You think you can escape it, outrun it. But in the end, it always catches up to you. It caught up to me, and when it did, it brought everything crashing down. This story might seem a little different. Usually, when someone shares their experiences, it's about betrayal, deceit, and heartbreak caused by the person they loved and trusted. But my story doesn't quite fit that mold. I wasn't just the poor guy who got blindsided. No, I had a hand in how things turned out, and I'm not here to pretend I was the victim. Let me tell you this up front. I didn't get to this point on my own. I was influenced, nudged, maybe even forced into making the choices I made. It wasn't entirely my fault, but I can't deny my role in it either. Let's go back to the beginning. We need a starting point, some background to make sense of everything. First off, I'm just an ordinary guy. I'm not extraordinary in any way, not particularly bright or heroic. I've spent my life working a regular job, just trying to get by and keep some semblance of stability. Drama has never been something I actively sought out. I'm consistent, steady, and maybe even predictable. That's just who I am, who I've always been. My name? It doesn't matter, but for the sake of clarity, my wife's name was Emily. Emily was the kind of person who drew attention everywhere she went. She wasn't breathtakingly beautiful in the conventional sense, but there was something about her that made people notice her the moment she stepped into a room. It wasn't just her looks. It was the way she carried herself, confident, sharp, and always quick with a clever remark. She had a magnetic personality. When she spoke, people listened, and when she laughed, others couldn't help but join in. That laughter, well, it was infectious. Even if you were having the worst day of your life, Her laugh could pull you out of it, if only for a moment. When we first met, I couldn't believe how easy things seemed for her. She moved through life like it was all a game, and she always seemed to be winning. People were drawn to her, including me. In the beginning, I admired how effortlessly she could charm a room, how everyone wanted to be around her. I was no different. Her wit, her energy, her ability to make even the most mundane situation entertaining. It was something that made her stand out from everyone else. But over time, what was once charming started to wear on me. Her sharp sense of humor, which had been so alluring at first, started to feel more like a weapon aimed at me. When you're always the butt of the joke, it's hard to keep laughing. She was the one with the charm, the lightheartedness, and I was the serious one, the one who kept everything grounded. It worked for a while, this balance we had. She brought the spark, and I made sure the whole thing didn't burn down. But eventually, the humor that everyone else loved about her became something more sinister in my eyes. It turned into a cruel game, and I didn't even realize how badly it would affect me until it was too late. One evening, after a long day of work, I came home like I always did. The routine was the same. Come in, drop my bag, try to shake off the exhaustion that seemed to cling to me more and more these days. Life was starting to feel like a never-ending grind, and this night didn't feel any different from the others. The house smelled warm and familiar. Emily had cooked dinner, something she often did when she was in a good mood. She had a way of making the atmosphere just right, with candles flickering and soft music playing in the background. It felt comforting, like everything was perfectly in place. We sat down to eat, like we did every night. The conversation was normal, light. We talked about our day, exchanged a few laughs, and for a brief moment, it felt like things were just as they should be. I wasn't really paying attention to the undercurrents in her tone or the subtle shifts in her body language. I was tired, distracted by the usual worries of life, trying to unwind. But as the meal went on, something changed. I could feel it, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. It was the way she leaned back in her chair, the way her voice softened in a way that wasn't casual. Then she said something that hit me like a punch to the gut. It came out of nowhere, as if it was the most natural thing in the world for her to say. She admitted to being tired of our relationship, like it was some old piece of furniture she was ready to throw out. The words hung in the air, and I wasn't sure I heard her right at first. I thought we were doing fine. We weren't arguing. There weren't any big issues, at least none that I could see. But clearly, I had missed something. Her confession wasn't done, though. After dropping that bomb, she casually admitted to having been with someone else. There was no emotion in her voice, no guilt. It was like she was telling me she bought a new shirt. She didn't apologize, didn't seem to think it was that big of a deal. I sat there, stunned, unable to process what I was hearing. My chest tightened, and my hands gripped the fork so tightly I nearly bent it. But I couldn't respond. I couldn't think of what to say, couldn't even make sense of the flood of emotions swirling inside me. And just like that, she stood up, gave me a quick kiss, and walked away, leaving me sitting at the table, paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't follow her or demand an explanation. My brain was too numb, too overwhelmed by the shock. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. The betrayal, the nonchalance with which she had confessed. It was all too much to process. After sitting there for a while, something inside me snapped. Instead of confronting her, instead of shouting or crying or doing anything a normal person might do in that situation, I decided I was going to get even. Revenge became my focus. She thought she could throw this at me, kiss me goodnight, and go to bed like nothing had happened. I wasn't going to let it slide that easily. I grabbed my coat and left the house, not knowing exactly where I was going or what I was going to do, but knowing I couldn't just sit there and stew in my anger. I needed space, time to think, and maybe someone to talk to. My first thought was to call my closest friend, the one person I usually turned to when things went wrong. But as I scrolled through my phone, I hesitated. My thumb hovered over a different name, Jessica Starr. Jessica wasn't just any friend. She was someone I had known long before I ever met Emily. We had been close once, running in the same social circles. There had been a time when I thought something might happen between us, but it never did. Timing was always off, and eventually, I ended up with Emily. But deep down, I suspected that Jessica still had feelings for me. And in that moment, filled with anger and confusion, I called her. Jessica picked up after a couple of rings, surprised to hear from me, but not in a bad way. She didn't ask too many questions when I asked her to meet me at a bar near her place. She agreed quickly, as if she already knew something was up. I jumped in my car and headed to meet her, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. By the time I walked into the bar, I was on autopilot. I saw her sitting there, waiting for me, a drink already in hand. We talked, and as the alcohol started to dull the edges of my anger, the words poured out. I told her everything. How Emily had casually admitted to cheating, how she acted like it was no big deal, how I felt like my entire world had just collapsed. Jessica listened, though at first, she didn't seem to believe what I was saying. But as the night wore on and the drinks kept coming, she realized I wasn't lying. She saw the pain in my eyes, the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. As we kept drinking, the mood shifted. The conversation grew heavier, and before I knew it, we were at her place. It didn't take long for things to escalate. One moment, we were sitting on her couch, talking, and the next, we were all over each other. In that moment, it didn't feel wrong. It felt like I was getting back at Emily, like I was reclaiming some of the power she had taken from me with her confession. And then I did something even more reckless. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Just a few clips here and there, nothing too explicit, but enough to capture the moment. Jessica noticed, of course, and at first, she wasn't happy about it. But I reassured her it was just for me, that no one else would ever see it. She hesitated, but eventually went along with it, the alcohol and years of unresolved feelings clouding her judgment. When it was all over, I left her apartment feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. I had done what I set out to do. I had gotten my revenge, but it didn't feel as good as I thought it would. In fact, I felt hollow, like I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. I went home, but I couldn't bring myself to face Emily, so I crashed on the couch, my mind still spinning from everything that had happened. The next morning, I knew things were going to be different. The air in the house was thick with tension, a silence that screamed louder than words. Emily was already up, sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look at me when I walked in. There was no lightness in the air, no casual conversation over coffee. I could tell she was angry, though not the kind of rage that explodes immediately. It was that slow burn, the kind of anger that simmers just below the surface, waiting for the right moment to boil over. I sat down across from her, pretending everything was fine, but I could feel her eyes on me. She was waiting for me to say something, to explain where I had been the night before. I wasn't in the mood to lie, but I wasn't ready to come clean either. So I kept it simple, told her I needed space to think, that I was out clearing my head. But she wasn't buying it. She knew something was up, and she wasn't going to let it go that easily. She pressed me for more, and finally, I told her the truth, or at least part of it. I said I was tired of our relationship, tired of how things had been going, just like she had said the night before. Emily was caught off guard by my words. She hadn't expected me to say anything like that. Her initial reaction was confusion, almost disbelief, as if she thought I was just saying it to get back at her for what she had confessed the night before. But I wasn't joking, and she soon realized that. I kept my tone even, hiding the storm of emotions I was struggling to contain. I knew what I was about to tell her would change everything, but at that moment, I didn't care. She had hurt me, and I wanted her to feel the same pain. When I told her what I had done, there was a brief moment where she didn't believe me. She thought I was messing with her, that it was some kind of twisted payback. But the look in my eyes must have told her otherwise. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I was calm, almost too calm, as I explained how I had spent the night with Jessica. The realization of what I was saying slowly sank in. Her expression shifted from disbelief to shock, and then to something much darker. At first, she didn't say anything, and I could see her trying to process the weight of my confession. It was like she was struggling to make sense of it, to figure out if I was serious. But when she saw that I wasn't backing down, her mood shifted. She thought I was lying, thought it was some elaborate ruse to make her feel bad. I could tell she still didn't fully believe me. That's when I decided to take it further. I pulled out my phone and showed her the video. I had captured just enough to prove that I wasn't lying, that what I had done with Jessica was real. As soon as the footage started playing, Emily's entire demeanor changed. Her face went pale, and her eyes widened in disbelief. She watched for only a few seconds before she realized that everything I had told her was the truth. That was the moment when all the emotions she had been holding back finally exploded. The anger and hurt that followed were unlike anything I had ever seen before. She was furious, more than I had ever seen her, and the pain in her voice was undeniable. It was like everything inside her had come undone in an instant. She was devastated, and it hit me harder than I thought it would. I had wanted her to feel pain, but seeing her like that, broken, furious, betrayed, made me realize just how far I had gone. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. In the middle of her outburst, she revealed something I hadn't expected. The confession she had made the night before about cheating on me? It was a lie, a joke meant to mess with me, a twisted prank she had intended to take back later. She had never been unfaithful. The whole thing was just a cruel attempt to play with my emotions. She had never intended for it to go this far, but by the time she was ready to tell me the truth, I had already stormed out, leaving her no chance to explain. The room spun as I tried to process what she was saying. I had believed her completely, without question, and in my rage, I had retaliated by sleeping with someone else. And not just anyone, Jessica, her friend, someone who had been a part of both our lives for years. Emily's prank had spiraled out of control, and I had fallen right into the trap, destroying everything in the process. The weight of what I had done crashed down on me. I had ruined everything over something that wasn't even real. I felt sick, but it was too late to take it back. Emily's expression was a mix of disbelief and devastation as she realized the extent of the damage. Her anger quickly turned to heartbreak, and she didn't hold back in letting me know how deeply I had hurt her. The betrayal she felt was raw, and there was no way for me to undo what I had done. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. I tried to apologize, to explain that I hadn't known, but my words fell flat. Nothing I said could change the fact that I had slept with her best friend out of spite, out of a desire for revenge. The damage was done, and Emily couldn't even look at me anymore. She was crushed, and there was nothing I could do to make it right. As she stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her, I stood there in the kitchen, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. I wanted to fix it, but there was no fixing this. I had destroyed everything we had built, and I knew there was no going back. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had lost her, truly and completely, and it was my own fault. That night, I didn't know what to do with myself. I wanted to leave, to disappear and escape the crushing weight of what I had done, but I didn't know where to go. I sat in the kitchen for hours, replaying everything in my head, trying to make sense of how it had all gone so wrong. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It all swirled inside me, mixing with the overwhelming guilt. I couldn't believe I had let it get this far. Eventually, I couldn't sit there any longer. I grabbed my jacket and left the house again, this time heading straight to Jessica's apartment. I needed to tell her everything. I had to explain what had happened, why I had done what I did, and how badly it had all backfired. When I arrived at her door, she opened it, and for a brief moment, I saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, like she thought I had come back to her for some other reason. But as soon as I started talking, her expression shifted. Jessica wasn't just angry, she was furious. She felt betrayed, used. She had thought our night together was something real, a rekindling of whatever had been between us years ago. But when I told her the truth, that it had all been driven by my desire to hurt Emily, her anger was palpable. She felt like a pawn in my twisted game of revenge, and she wasn't wrong. I had dragged her into this mess without considering the consequences. Jessica's anger was a mirror to my own guilt. She had been hurt too, in a different way, but the damage was just as real. She had lost her best friend, and now, she realized that what had happened between us meant nothing. It was a mistake, a rash decision born out of a moment of rage. She made it clear that she wanted nothing more to do with me after that, and I couldn't blame her. I had ruined everything, and now I had to live with the consequences. As I left Jessica's apartment that night, the weight of everything settled heavily on my shoulders. I had betrayed two of the most important people in my life, and there was no way to make it right. I returned home, unsure of what would happen next. When I walked through the door, the first thing Emily said to me was that she had already called a lawyer. She was filing for divorce, and there was no turning back. Her voice was cold, detached, like she had already made peace with the fact that our marriage was over. I couldn't argue with her. I couldn't beg her to reconsider. I had crossed a line, and I knew it. All I could do was stand there, hollowed out by the weight of my own actions. Emily had made her decision, and there was nothing I could do to change it. She had been hurt too deeply, and now I had to face the consequences of my choices. Over the next few weeks, the divorce process moved quickly. Emily didn't want to drag it out. She wanted to be done with me, to sever all ties as quickly as possible. The house we had shared became cold and empty as we began the process of separating our lives. There were no fights, no shouting matches. We were both too exhausted, too broken, to fight anymore. It was over, and we both knew it. During this time, I tried to make things right with Jessica, but the damage there was irreparable as well. Our friendship, whatever had been left of it, was gone. She couldn't forgive me for using her, and I couldn't forgive myself either. It was clear that there was no future for us, not as friends, not as anything more. We were done, and I had to accept that. As the divorce became finalized, I knew I couldn't stay in that town any longer. Everyone knew what had happened. Emily had told our mutual friends everything, and it wasn't long before the entire social circle was aware of the details. The whispers, the judgment, the looks, I couldn't escape it. I had become the villain in everyone's eyes, and in a way, I couldn't blame them. I had made my choices, and now I had to live with the consequences. So I decided to leave. I packed up my things and moved to a new city, far away from the wreckage of my old life. It was the only option left, a chance to start over, to put some distance between myself and the mistakes I had made. The move wasn't easy. Leaving behind everything I had known for years was painful, but staying would have been worse. I needed to get away from the reminders of everything I had destroyed. In the new city, I found a simple job, something far removed from the chaos I had left behind. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was steady. I showed up, did my work, and went home. There was no drama, no emotional entanglements, just the quiet, predictable routine I had once taken for granted. For a while, that was enough. It gave me the space I needed to think, to reflect on everything that had happened, and to figure out who I was without all the mess hanging over my head. As I settled into my new life, I met someone else, someone who, for the first time in a long time, made me feel like there might be a chance for happiness again. But the past still loomed large in my mind, and I knew I had to be careful. I wasn't the same person I had been before everything fell apart, and I couldn't afford to make the same mistakes again. I had to take things slow, to make sure I was ready before diving into anything new.